Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. This is Firoz Manji from Daraja Press. Welcome to Organizing in the Time of COVID-19. I hope that you are keeping well and safe in these troubled times. Today, we have two guests who I'll be speaking to, both of them associated with an organization called African Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. Our first guest is Coumba Toure. Coumba is a writer, storyteller, member of the African Feminist Forum and the Per Ankh collective. She's a board member of TrustAfrica and an ambassador for Africans Rising for Peace, Justice and Dignity. She has served on the board of Urgent Action Fund for Women in Africa, and she's an advisor to the Global Fund for Women and to the International Development Exchange. And she's a mother, a sister, a daughter to many, and is an extraordinary writer and performer. So a warm welcome to you, Coumba. Really nice to have you. Our second guest is Muhammed Lamin. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you.
Lamin is a Gambian human rights activist and is a coordinator of Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. He was instrumental in the organizing of the widespread protests in 2017 that brought about the downfall of the Yahya Jammeh's dictatorship. He leads the emerging Pan-African movement, African Rising, Africans Rising, and has a record in youth capacity development. He's someone with a Pan-African vision, experience, and energy on the areas of youth. A very warm welcome to you, also, Mohammed. Perhaps we can start because I'm not sure how many of our listeners and people watching the show know much about African Rising. Perhaps because Mohammed is the current coordinator, perhaps you could say a few words just so that people have some understanding of.
Thank you for having me, and then hello to everybody listening or watching. Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity is a Pan-African movement of people and organizations with a dream of promoting justice, peace, and dignity for Africans, as well unifying the African civil society. And this came through a massive consultation among Africans in Africa and as well in diaspora to respond to the critics of making the civil society relevant to the needs of African people. About 4,000 Africans were consulted at the beginning to how do we make the civil society more relevant to the African people. From that consultation, we felt that there is a need for us to create a Pan-African movement that will unify the struggles of our people, but that will also enable and then support the grassroots movements and their struggles around justice, peace, and dignity, and also continue the African liberation, to kind of deliver the true liberation of the people of Africa. So from 2017, we launched the movement. We have now have over 23,000 members across the continent and diaspora. Over 400 organizations have registered to be members, and then operating in more than 56 countries, 49 in Africa, where movements and grassroots organizations, collectives are, taking center stage in holding governments accountable, but also championing the cause of justice, peace, and dignity.
Great. Coumba, you were instrumental in the formation, the foundation of this organization. What's your perspective on it? How do you see its relevance in relation to the struggles we are now facing of COVID-19?
Yes, Africans Rising is currently the organization that I'm giving most of my time. That's where I'm investing most of my time. I started coming in as an ambassador, and now working very closely, coordinating with Muhammed Lamin and other members across the continent. What I would add to what Lamin says, which is really what Africans Rising is that it also comes from the understanding that there are many, many Africans that are rising. People individually, in groups, in communities, have always, resisted, have always tried, and did what they could to bring about justice and dignity for themselves. So we're going from that assumption, and we are bringing people together who are doing just that, amplifying their voices, and connecting them, and facilitating learning among them. It also comes from the understanding that African liberation is still something to be done. Like there is an unfinished business. Yes, we've gone through the movements of independences, but we know that we still live on a continent, even though it's called that there is, many riches, there are many possibilities. Most people are not living in dignity, and we know that that's not how it should be, and that we need to do everything we can so that the future generation live in a better place.
So, I mean, here we are in a situation with COVID-19 gradually escalating in Africa. It's hit Western Europe, the capitalist countries, quite extensively. But there is no doubt that the problem is arising in Africa. So let's start with Senegal, where you are based, and say, well, what is the situation there, and what does it mean to organize in the time of COVID, where there is lockdown and so on? Perhaps, Coumba, we can start with you.
Yes, thank you, Firoz, first of all, for you just giving this opportunity and for the work you are doing, getting people's voice out there. So that opportunity, we really appreciate it. Yes, we are in Senegal, we're based here. And yes, numbers are rising in Senegal, as it is in all of the countries in West Africa, I would say, and, across the continent. People stay a lot on numbers. I mean, if you take just hard figures that are shown to us, they will tell you about the 300 and so people have been infected, 100 and so got, released, now have been healed, and some others are still in. But we look at this more than just the figures that we receive every day, the count, the head count, because those account do not really account for the reality of what is hitting people. When the whole world is basically really living in uncertainty now, those who used to, those of us, and I would say, on this continent, those who used to already live in serious uncertainty, like those who wake up and, are not really clear about how much they will make, what they will eat, and if they get sick, they don't know whether or not they will be able to get access to healthcare, now are living in double uncertainty. Or triple. I don't know how you do the math for this. What it basically means when solutions are put forward and they tell people, okay, you have to wash your hands. I mean, that's so simple. I mean, those of us who are privileged enough, to just open the tap and water runs. I guess it's a great advice, and we'll do it more. But what about people who've been struggling, including people who've been fighting and speaking out and saying water is a basic necessity and everybody should have access to it? People have been screaming this and not being heard. And what do you do today with that? Then you go as other things that people say. You need to stay in. The solution is about people not moving. It's about confinement. And we've seen, I mean, our governments have, been, really trying, I have to say. Here in Senegal, the Senegalese government have been, taking decisions. Sometimes I feel much way ahead than some of the Western countries in terms of the numbers that we had when they decided to take certain decisions. But when it comes to asking people and making it law for people to stay confined, they are still hesitating because just the situation and the way our economy works and the way people live when you reinforce confinement, it really make it extremely hard and dangerous for many people. So there are many things that needs to be done before, right now there is a whole program on distributing food to people. All of those things needs to be taken into account for people who make their life, their daily bread on those things. So what I want to say is that today we're facing COVID-19 as a disease, and maybe not to the point where we can, talk about the big numbers that we are hearing in the other countries, but the impact is already as hard, as harsh, because we cannot travel from one city to another. The prices of just local transport have gone up because people cannot transport themselves the way they used to. And what that directly means to someone whose specific job or livelihood depended on those movements is a very high price. It basically means hunger. It means a lot of stress for people. So we are hit as hard already, even though the numbers might not look like the one that we are hearing elsewhere.
Well, thank you. That's a helpful sort of starting point on this. I mean, it seems to me that the policies that virtually all African governments are following are the washing of hands. Well, as you pointed out, many people, in fact, the majority of our people don't always have easy access to water, let alone soap. But secondly, is this confinement, and I know in lockdown, I know in my country, in Kenya, I've seen the same situation in South Africa. I've seen the same situation in Dakar when I was living there. The people don't have homes. So what does it mean to be locked down? And the third element seems to me that there's a policy of social distancing. But what does social distancing mean if you live in crowded settlements with no services available, and it is almost impossible to be 2 meters away from everyone else? It seems to me that this is a policy that speaks to the middle classes, the minority in in our countries, and that the question is therefore is really social distancing a means of protecting the middle classes from the riffraff, from the people who they assume, the poor, the impoverished, to be kept away. And certainly in places like Kenya, in South Africa, in Ghana, there's been a militarization of the streets. And so, Lamin, perhaps you can talk a little bit more about what you see the implications of impact on beyond just Senegal and Gambia.
Yeah, great. Africa itself has its own realities. I know the challenge of COVID-19 is on everybody around the world, but the reality is, as people in Africa, our settings, our traditional settings, our livelihood settings, have made it very bit harder for us to observe as a continent, for people to observe all these different international guidelines around what's in hand, because like lack of access to water is really affecting majority of the people, especially those in the urban settlements, but in the peripheries, in the slums. They don't have access to water. Those in the rural areas are also struggling with water. And then as well, the high level of poverty is really affecting people. Again, the social settings of the high dependency rate of people. Few families are staying in one confined room, 6 people in a particular room, and then they have to struggle for livelihood. So most of the African people are living on the basis of what we call hand to mouth, where they go and struggle, have their meals from that struggle in the daytime, and bring it and buy food and put it on the table. So that make the whole response mechanism on the continent very, very hard. So it's critical for people to reflect, especially leaders in Africa, to think of realistic strategies that will be able to implement in the face of responding to COVID-19. Because a lot of noise have been going around on the continent, especially people in the poor communities, saying that I think if we don't mind, we're going to die out of hunger instead of COVID-19, because the certain governments have taken certain restrictions or certain measures that are really affecting the population in terms of livelihood. So it's kind of taking them completely from their livelihood. So they are their lives are more in danger right now. And then it's creating a lot of anger, and then it's creating a lot of civil actions that people are now not respecting the rules anymore because they don't want to die of hunger. So that's response coming from the governments in terms of militarization have caused a lot of challenges. In fact, a lot of some lives have been lost with response that we have seen from government. And then Africans right then have been condemning all these human rights violations that the governments are trying to use in terms of control measures in their response. So we are pushing governments to really ensure that they are putting in mechanisms that are more realistic in terms of African way of response. We really need to see the realities and understand the realities of Africa and embrace these realities in terms of response. The continent is very much blessed that people are very much philanthropic. They give a lot of support. So we have seen, as Coumba said, we have seen a lot of support, and our members have been encouraged to, champion this and then ask people to support families that cannot sustain the lockdowns. So we have seen a lot of our members and our communities, coming out from their philanthropic gestures, giving out food items to the communities. And some governments have started doing this. But the reality is, for how long can we sustain the livelihood support from pockets of individuals, but from also government? So we have been asking governments to really, think about how they are going to be responding to it, especially the food crisis it's come along with, by revisiting their budgets, allocating certain budget lines to responding to this crisis. As well, holding governments accountable in terms of where the money goes, where the money coming from international philanthropy or international donations, but as well internal funding. How is this money going down to the grassroots? How is this money going down to the affected people? to ensure that the greater impact is made. Some speculations have been going that in many countries, when the budgets have been announced that the governments are responding, people say, "Oh, is this money going down to the pockets of the officials in government ministries or government departments?" So that social accountability component of holding governments and officials accountable to ensure that the citizenry are benefiting from the allocations and then the response mechanism. But I think it's critical for us to embrace and then also appreciate the innovative nature of response in Africa. We have seen in Senegal, for example, students have created their own hand sanitizers from the university. That need to be encouraged, that need to be promoted. We need to see philanthropists supporting that venture so that we can use our own innovative way in terms of response. And as well in Kenya, recently, the university students have created ventilators. So those kind of innovative innovations coming from the young people in the universities are really amazing, and they need to be encouraged. They need to be supported. But again, we are also encouraging governments to really decongest the prisons. I know WHO have talked about this, but we are trying to really enforce this through a campaign on asking governments to free political prisoners, but also to free journalists. I know governments have been responding. We have seen about 800 prisoners have been released in Ghana, and as well about 2,000 in Senegal. But this release of prisoners are not in certain countries touching the political prisoners who have been opposed of government, but they have been there in confinement for ages, for months or for years without any trial. So we are encouraging governments and other civil society leaders and high influential Africans to really put their voice to this and ask African governments to really use this great opportunity to take bold steps, even to release people who have been their opponents and then they are in confinement. Because information have reached to us that certain prisons have now discovered COVID-19 positive cases. So if the trend continues, the way African prisons have been organized, have been structured, we might end up having more deaths in our prisons if we do not take steps in decongesting our prisons by releasing prisoners who deserve to be released, because they have opposed a particular government of corruption, of certain brutality, and then they're in confinement. So it's an opportunity for African governments to really release. So we are running this parallel campaigns around African collective response to COVID-19, and as well asking government to release political prisoners and journalists.
Right. But it seems to me one of the common threads throughout the continent is that over the last 30 to 40 years, our health services, which we fought for, which was our fruits of independence,
Yes.
which lives were sacrificed for, what blood was spilt for, that those have been dismantled almost in every country across the continent, and it's too easy for people to say, "Oh well, this is the IMF and World Bank who are responsible." The way Amilcar Cabral put it was, "Rice only cooks inside the pot." And we have to hold our own governments and elites to account, because they are benefiting from this structural adjustment which has taken place. So we're now in a situation where even before we had COVID rising, we had an inadequate, destroyed health service. So now the question then arises, you talk about campaigning. Well, if you're confined, if you're locked down, if you have to practice social distancing, keeping people away from each other, what does it mean? Can you explain what is Coumba? What does organizing in the time of COVID mean? How do we create the opportunities for doing that?
Yeah, what I'd like to say, Firoz, is that I mean, people stay in when they are under threat. You know, we talked to some of our members in Zimbabwe who are saying, listen, you know, we're waiting, we know what our army is capable of, so we don't want to get out and get hurt. But there are many people who are not even, you know, really in this game of confinement. They just can't. They are moving around. I mean, currently in Senegal, there is a curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. During the day, people are out and about, and they are moving around. Of course, people are saying we need to make sure everybody have access to a mask. You know, like you said, those who can really retire, stay in their home, have access to internet, electricity, have a bank account and a salary, you know, can do it. But there are like too many people, many more people who cannot just, that's not an option for them. And those people, they're out there. That's number one. So people need to just understand that when we speak about confinement in general, in many of these countries, it is not the same thing that is happening where you have a majority of people on lockdown. You have a minority here on lockdown and a majority still out. That's what we are at least witnessing when we are here.
Can I ask you a question? What this curfew?
Yeah.
I mean, is this based on the idea that during the daytime the virus doesn't spread, but only at nighttime?
You know, that's exactly the question I asked on my social media. I was just like, okay, is this virus rest during the day and start moving around at night? So that, I mean, is it only people who are going to nightclubs and restaurants who may catch it? Or but the reality is what our government want is confinement. They actually don't have, I want to say, at least in Senegal, the courage to impose it based on everything we've talked about before. I mean, you'll have a revolution. People will be on the street if it was reinforced that way that quickly. Unless people see it as a direct threat to their life to go out, I mean, they will not stay in. Now, in terms of organizing for us, and particularly at Africans Rising, now to me, for me, in the way I see things, is the time to organize even our own families. Like you said, people are in settlement, people are in houses. Lamin mentioned it, people are in homestead. There's a lot of people. And this is really the time to go back to simple, basic, grassroots organizing. Just because our work in this time is to make sure every single citizen take in their hand their life. That's the campaign we're calling Rise for Your Life. And to put the question to their, you want to say, not only their local government, anybody close to them, from the chief of the district to the imam or to the mayor to the president, what's going on in the health, in my health district. If you just call up and ask, if you wonder when something happened to you, where would they take you? And you call up and see whether or not they have what they need, and put the pressure and say, we want to make sure. I mean, we are amazed. Firoz, really, my thing these days is that I feel like we've not been bold enough. We've never asked for what we really needed. In Senegal, lately, one of the latest movement, or one of the young person, he's not so young, who was arrested because he went at the gate of the President Palace to say, we need to have the price of electricity down. We are not going to accept that electricity costs more because we cannot pay. And he got to jail for that. And today, we are saying, what if he said electricity should be free for 3 months for all poor people then? Would they arrest him or take him to a mental health institution? Because nobody could say that, even though that was what we ought to fight for. We never dared to speak that. And what I'm saying when you say organizing in time of COVID-19 is that it is the time for the demands and the ask to be the boldest that it ever been, because we knew there was abundance, we knew there were possibilities, but we never dare to ask so much for so many who were completely on the fringes. Who would ever think that our government could find some money to give free food to people? Firoz. Who?
But what you're saying reminds me of Samir Amin's, the late Samir Amin's statement. What we need is audacity and more audacity. And I think you're quite right. I think we've been missing this. And what worries me about the strategy, not just of the Senegalese government, but many of our governments, has been that they are using this lockdown as a way of what Naomi Klein talks about as the shock doctrine. They're using the epidemic as a way of strengthening their position. I don't know whether you will have read Arundhati's Roy's The Pandemic is a Portal. It's really very, very worthwhile. And in particular, she concludes saying, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew.
Yeah.
This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And I think this is the question that I would like to pose to the two of you. What are we doing? What is if Africans are rising in the time of COVID rising, in the time of the shock doctrine rising? What are we supposed to be doing? What can we be doing which really takes us to not imagining what the world might look like tomorrow, but building today that possibility? What does that mean in concrete terms today? Which of you would like to take?
COVID-19 in itself, as you said, COVID rising, have exposed the broken down of systems in Africa. So it have exposed that there are many systems that are broken down. Like we have been watching on news and different platforms, seeing that the Western world have been responding to supporting small businesses. They have been responding to supporting citizens who are unemployed. In Africa, there are no mechanism of even discovering or even ascertaining who are these small businesses. The statistics and the records are not there. So it kind of exposes the continent in different aspects. When it comes to the health system, it's broken. So it creates an opportunity for all of us to be very bold and very strong in the advocacy that we do and in the organizing that we do as people on the continent, to unify the voices together, and then hold governments accountable, not to just put in one-off strategies, but to put in long-term, inclusive strategies that will respond to rebuilding the broken systems and structures that we have on the continent. That includes our health system, which is very critical. So it gives us, all of us, an urgency of asking ourselves, what kind of health system do we want to see in the near future, in the next 50 years or 100 years, 20 years, for our children and for ourselves? So it creates an urgency for us to question what kind of education system do we want to have on the continent for our people, because we have seen that our continent is not able to even that our countries are not in the front line, or the front line of creating the medication, or creating the vaccines that will respond. Why I'm bringing this is because there have been speculations that vaccines should be tested on the continent. But if these vaccines are going to be produced, or Africans are going to sit on the table of production of these vaccines, we might be able to trust, our people might be able to trust them. So it's a matter of questioning ourselves in terms of our education system, so that Africa can be on the table when it comes to creation of solutions. But again, when you look at the continent, how we are going, when the pandemic goes beyond 6 months or more, we will be discovering that our structural processes of even feeding ourselves will be more exposed, because Africa doesn't have the mechanism of dealing with their own issues. So it created an opportunity for Africa to face its reality, and then to be able to deal with this reality frankly now. And then our leaders really need to think of homegrown solutions, because our dynamics are quite different. So our dynamics are very much social connected. We are mixed. We need to really have our own ways of dealing with the situation, and we have to have an African way of dealing with things. Yeah.
But is it not insufficient to see this as a health crisis? That the solution lies not in the health aspect, but in major structural changes to the way society operates, because it's not really about health. That's the outcome.
Yes.
A car hitting you it leads to health consequences, but it's that car that is causing the trouble. Coumba, your comments on that?
Yes, Firoz, thank you. It is not a health issue that we are facing right now. We're facing much, much more and wider than that. The reason why we stay on the health issue is mainly an organizing purpose. Because Firoz, when you pull people together and you organize to say, we need freedom, we need decolonization, we need to have our livelihood in our hands, you find a very small number of people who people label as activists, as all kind of names, who are always screaming, organizing. And then you find a small group of people who are extremely comfortable in what they have and can travel and go wherever they want to get whatever they need. And then you find a vast majority of people who don't even see the possibility of, making change happen. Now we get to a type of crisis that is very graphic. It's visible. It's life and death. It's about your health. It's a disease. It's a virus that is isolated, because people are dying all the time, just from malnutrition. They're not eating correctly, so they die from all kind of disease. But it's so invisible that it's so hard to organize around. Today, when you say COVID-19, and because it touches even the middle class, our governments are obliged to take decisions that are even pushing furthermore, the vast majority. You have an unprecedented possibility of organizing regular people to say, listen, you got to, speak up for yourself, do something for your own life. And that's the main reason I think many of the organizers stays, on the health piece. But the reality to me now is we need to go from there to the boldness that we were talking about. Now, what Lamin is saying, there is an exposure of everything that is going wrong. But there is also an exposure that everything that is possible. I mean, we sit here and we hear that, the banks can bail out countries, in England or in Germany. The same people who always say that, the state do their thing, the corporate, whatever, money doesn't fall from the sky. And all of a sudden, there is money to do things in France. We are all here. This is the time for a further decolonization. During the independence struggles in the 60s after the World War, it is because African people have gone to the World War and seen with their own eyes people that they thought was invincible, die in front of their own eyes, and them being, saving them sometimes. That when they came back, it didn't add up. It didn't make sense that we were still colonized. Well, that's COVID-19. What's it doing right now? We're sitting here and we're hearing people in the US saying, oh, you know what? They should have, healthcare available to everybody. We're sitting here and we're hearing, people in Spain saying that they're gonna put some money to give a basic universal income. I mean, the same people who always, told us this is how you do to get developed, to be in this world, to make sense, to fit, are now, moving back and taking and doing things that they prevented even our governments to do for us. Yeah. So Firoz, this is the time. This is the moment where we say, listen, we don't have to listen to what you were saying. Our leaders, if they were courageous enough, this is the time that they can make history and turn this whole continent around. Well, our people need to push them to be courageous enough.
Let me ask you one last question here. Supposing, theoretically, that you were able to organize a mass meeting of the disenfranchised, of the workers, of the homeless, of the people living in the shacks and on the streets, and you had this big mass meeting, and you said to them, what are your demands? What would be those demands?
I know. Yeah, go ahead, Lamin.
Carry on. I will comment after.
No, okay. Lamin.
Yeah, I think one of the key demands that I see that have been an opportunity that this COVID rising, as you call it, or COVID-19, have brought to us is, it's telling us that we need our own homegrown solutions to the realities, because the whole pandemic have, showcased to the world. Countries have showcased to the world that the realities are different, though we have similar challenges, but our realities are different. So it's like everyone is working on their own, in their own silos, in their own corners. So the critical demand for me is, how do we have our own homegrown solutions to our realities? And as well,
let me interrupt you there. But what I'm asking is not what you and I might say, but what would the dispossessed say? What would their demands today be?
What Firoz, what I've been hearing, and you know, really, as I'm listening to people, the demands are not different. They just need to be heard.
Yes.
I mean, people have always asked for dignity. They want to have water. They want to be able to have access to their food. They want to have control over their own lives. And today, the demands are not different, but they're stronger. What happened, Firoz, is that we've developed a high tolerance for the misery of the majority of people. People have been living like this for so long. I mean, let's get back to the health system that everybody's screaming about. On a regular day, without COVID-19, you step into any a public hospital on this, you know, on this continent. To the exception of few, it's chaos. The doctors are losing their minds. The nurses are losing their minds as if it was, you know, COVID-19 in Italy and in New York. That's our daily lives.
Yeah.
So now, with this happening at a global level, we look around and we see people screaming, scrambling, you know, nurses, you know, taking onto suicide. And we're like, how come? How come all these damn years we've been living through this and nobody cared? So the demands are not changing. The demands are rising now more because people will say, we cannot take this. And this virus is even underlying it and making it even harder and stronger.
I think what you're raising, Coumba, is I think a really important point, and that is that we have developed a high tolerance for immiseration of our people, of the impoverishment of our people, and I think that's important because in expressing it that way, Coumba, you're pleading with us to take ownership of the problem. It is not merely saying there is a problem. When one finger points one direction, the rest of the fingers point back at ourselves. And I think that's why the whole issue of organizing and being creative and finding ways to organize in the time of COVID rising, I think is a major challenge.
Yes.
I'd like to thank both of you for a really stimulating discussion and some really important insights into the issues that we're trying to address. Perhaps I give you an opportunity to give a last message that you would like to convey to people watching the show. Lamin, shall we start with you?
Yeah. I wanted to just say that, re-echo what I've said earlier. You know, we are facing the pandemic with similar challenges, but our realities are different. And then that's why the urgency for our governments and our people to really face the actual realities of the societies that we live in the response to COVID-19, and as well responding in COVID-19 towards COVID-19, not limited to the responding of now immediate solutions, but think of long-term and better preventive measures of pandemics like this.
Good, great, thank you. Coumba.
Firoz, thank you again for this opportunity. What I would just say is, again, there has been people that have not accepted tolerating our people living in dignity, if I can call it like that. Even if there are not a big number of people, there have always been people resisting. They've been calling them resisting, but in fact, they've been always pointing to the possibilities, and people have been saying, we should not accept that most of us stay on the fringes, stay hungry, stay without access to health, stay without opportunities, stay silent, stay on the side. People have been working for this. To me, this is the time to listen to them. This is the time to turn around instead of considering them as dissident, as, I don't know, all kind of names that they're labeled, to say, what were you saying again? What were those solutions that you were proposing? How do you think we can make sure everybody gets the water they need? This is the time for everyone to turn to those who've been always saying the way we are building the world, the way we are building the world where just a few of us accumulate as much as they can and leave everybody else on the fringes is not viable and will not work. This is the time. So really, this is my call to again come back and to listen, because there are solutions that people have been trying, and we have enough. We have enough in this world, on this continent. We have enough for people to live in dignity.
Thank you very much, both of you, for an inspiring discussion and some really interesting ideas that you've put out. Thank you for sparing time to join us on this show. Really appreciate that, and I'm sure there will be a lot of interest in the ideas that you have put forward. Keep up
Thanks so much.
Keep up the struggle. Keep it up, and we cannot lose heart. We need to move forward. So, really appreciate your being on the show. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you, Lamin.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Coumba.
Thank you, both of you, and I wish you well. Keep safe, and warmest wishes to your family.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That was Muhammed Lamin and Coumba Toure from Senegal, from Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. I hope you found this a stimulating discussion, and I would like to thank you for joining us here in organizing in the time of COVID-19. Actually, based on what Coumba and Mohammed talked about, maybe we should change the name, say organizing in the time of COVID Rising. Anyway, tomorrow we'll be talking to Nick Dearden from Global Justice Now regarding the whole issue of the resources that are available to African countries, in particular in terms of the growing debt that is in many people's eyes an illegal debt to the banks and to the European countries and Western countries. So join me tomorrow, and thank you for being on the show. This is Firoz Manji from Daraja Press signing off.